And we are back with another Cannabis Thought Leadership podcast series. This is Abe Cohn with THC Legal Group, and today we have Joy with us. Joy, how are you?
I'm doing wonderfully today, and I hope you are too. Thank you for having me.
Great. Okay, so tell us, who you are, what your company is, what you're interested in. Let us get to know you a little bit.
Thanks so much. Well, I'm an industrial hemp specialist. I try not to call myself a consultant because apparently consultants are a dime a dozen right now, most of whom don't have any idea what they're talking about. So I don't like to be associated with cannabis consulting on any level.
Okay.
So I'm an industrial hemp specialist. I have a company, an advisory, public education, and public speaking company called Hemp Ace International. And I've actually been involved in the industrial hemp space for over a quarter of a century.
Wow.
In the movements. I owned the first hemp store in the state of New York in the early 90s. And when the Vermont Hemp Bill passed, the inaugural Vermont Hemp Bill passed in 1996, I was appointed to serve as secretary to the Vermont Hemp Council.
Wow.
And so relocated the family there. And an interesting tidbit, Dr. Bob Mellamede of Phoenix Tears also served on that council. So I've known him for a good long time. He's amazing. Most people don't associate him with Vermont, but he's a Vermont boy. And then when my two children got a little older and we needed more funding, I relocated to Seattle and began a dual career in compliance and complex civil litigation.
Oh.
And then went back into industrial hemp full-time in 2012 when both of my boys went to college.
Wow. Interesting. That is quite a career you've had. One of the things that people find so interesting about hemp is kind of just how it fits into cannabis itself. So how it fits into the plant, how we should be thinking about the legal consequences of hemp vis-a-vis the Controlled Substance Act. So, I'd love for you to talk about that. What does it mean for CBD, for example, to be extracted from hemp versus from, quote, cannabis? How should we be thinking about that?
Excellent question, and I do an entire standalone CLE on this one subject. So in reality, it takes a minimum of an hour to answer the question thoroughly, but believe me, I'll do my best.
Okay.
And the CLE is actually called The Curious Legal Status of CBD and Hemp-Derived Cannabinoids, and it's that curious. So the reality is that, still in the definition of marijuana in the Controlled Substances Act, obviously it has the word resins included in that definition 3 times. So even though it looks like a paragraph of a definition, it's merely comprised of 2 sentences. The first sentence sort of defines marijuana, and then the second sentence, even though it's part of that definition, attempts to define industrial hemp by creating an exception. So it says the term does not include the mature stocks, this type of thing. However, there's an exception within that exception that says except the resins therefrom. So, that's a major slide in these CLEs where the word resins I have in red bold font so people can see that, geez, in 2 sentences, they've used the word resins 3 times. Clearly the architects of, frankly, the Marijuana Tax Act, because the Controlled Substances Act adopted that definition of marijuana word for word. The Nixon administration didn't change a single word. Clearly, the architects of 1937 Marijuana Tax Act wanted us to know that whether you're talking about marijuana or whether you're talking about hemp, the resins are off limits. So that's sort of the drum beat that is being beat as we build this exciting and important industry. So having said that, I will say that there is a whole body of law and regulatory law and ambiguity and things that the DEA have done on their own skirting the rulemaking process that make it so arguable and so defensible to get into that space if we're talking about CBD derived from hemp. However, there is a ton of pushback now after we've started to really develop this and move forward. We're starting to see a lot of pushback because it is still a cannabinoid and it is still a resin from the cannabis plant. Now, I could go on for another half an hour to talk
definitely. If I could just kind of suspend this topic for one moment and comment on something which I think is certainly immediately interesting to me, which is the sense that I got from your description is that you're somewhat of an originalist and perhaps even a textualist in your approach to reading legislation. So, what is it that, what did the framers of the law, or, when people talk about this, they're usually speaking about constitutional interpretation. But, I thought that was so fascinating. Your question was, well, what did the authors of the legislation mean when they wrote this? And that's kind of a very interesting and I think important way to approach some of this tricky interpretation. What did they mean versus what do we want it to mean versus what the current administration is reading into it to mean, what the potential Trump administration would read into it to mean. So I think that's really great.
And to further that, and how has the FDA, since the definition of marijuana, defined resin, defined oil? So there are all these great arguments which make that space very defensible. But to bring it up to sort of current law, because now, of course, a beautiful wrench is thrown in the wheel when the Agricultural Act of 2014, which is commonly known as the Farm Bill, was signed into law and included this beautiful amendment called Section 7606. And here's, by the way, where we start to differentiate, unfortunately, marijuana from industrial hemp in the modern day, because the only thing that is guiding the legal marijuana market in legal states is the Cohn memo, which is a piece of paper. It's just a memo, and it's written by a, frankly, former U.S. Deputy Attorney General who's now in private practice, whereas industrial hemp has actual law that has been passed by the Congress and signed by President Obama, and that's Section 7606 of the Farm Bill. In that bill, which is in that amendment, it did two very important things. It defined agricultural pilot program, and it defined industrial hemp for the first time in U.S. history, distinguishing it from marijuana. And what Kentucky and most states that are moving forward, allowing the extraction of the actual flowering parts of the plant, phytocannabinoids from industrial hemp. The interesting thing is that the way industrial hemp was defined, they did not include any carve-outs at all for the resins. It's a very simple definition that says any part of the plant cannabis sativa, whether growing or not, that has a THC concentration of, equal to or less than 3%, 0.3%, of course. So that is sort of big enough to drive a hole big enough to drive a hemp truck through, in that there's no carve out for the resin. So a seemingly conservative state like Kentucky is saying that means we can do the resins.
Well, just to take the conversation slightly more high level for people who are kind of confused, we have all these terms. I think it would be great to just kind of really isolate what the terminology means. What's the difference between hemp, cannabis, CBD? How do they all interact? What is hemp fundamentally?
Thank you. Okay, so everyone, whether I'm talking to lawyers, farmers, industrialists, or just basic activists and community interested parties, everyone gets a taxonomy slide right off the bat.
Okay.
The plant family is Cannabaceae, and underneath that plant family, we have hops, which is humulus, we have cannabis, a couple of different other genuses. So let's take the cannabis genus for a moment. Underneath cannabis genus, we have these 4 divergent subspecies that I do not spend my time on because taxonomists and botanists argue about whether it's cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, cannabis afghanica, or even cannabis americana. So let's eliminate from this conversation those divergent subspecies and go with genus cannabis.
Okay.
In the beginning, there was cannabis over tens of thousands of years through human intervention. It was bred for our purposes. So what we have is an oilseed and fiber type, commonly known as industrial hemp, and we have a drug type, commonly known as marijuana. The main difference between the two types in reality is a low resin crop versus a high resin crop. One has a CBD to THC ratio traditionally. Obviously, we've gone into major breeding and genetic, issues here, but industrial hemp traditionally has a CBD to THC ratio of 2-to-1. So you're always getting the anti-intoxicant twice as much as you're getting the intoxicant.
Wait, if I can interrupt for a moment.
Sure.
Are CBD and THC 2 subtypes of the broader category of resin?
So thank you. Let's get scientific here, because that let me just say, I will bring that to a higher level, as we say.
Okay.
So there are now known 144 cannabinoids within the hemp plant. We used to know 60, then 87, 104, now 144. And by the way, we went from 87 to 144 fairly recently. Of those cannabinoids, the ones that we know the most about, even though we know very little about them, are CBD, which is cannabidiol, that's the acronym, and THC, the acronym obviously for tetrahydrocannabinol, or some people say delta-9. But those are cannabinoids, and where do we get those cannabinoids? From the resins of the plant. So they're from the plant material. So what we see a lot, because folks try to believe that if they can get it from the mature stock, extract cannabinoids from the mature stock, that somehow it's legal. The reality is it's still a resin. And the other reality is that, of course, all of this hemp-derived CBD is not coming from the woody stalk of the hemp plant. CBD and cannabinoids are derived mostly from, of course, the flowering parts of the plant.
You know, what's so tricky and I suppose simultaneously interesting about this is that the ambiguity really centers on how one chooses to pick different thresholds of substance. So as we said before, 3%, maybe it should be 5%, 8%, depending on where...
0.3. It's really important that we say 0.3, and I apologize, that happens a lot, but it's 0.3. It's very low.
0.3. Okay.
Yes.
Even lower and arguably more subjective. The policy... the policy works in a very circular way with the science. How we choose to define things has very real effects. Okay, so just kind of moving back into this legal analysis, people want to know, it is legal, it's not legal, when is it legal, which states is it legal in, what about transferring between states, how does all that work?
Thank you so much. So I do want to say we've got that bass drum of keep your hands off the darn resin.
Yeah.
Then we have the reality that there are 4 pending federal bills, each of them attempting to define cannabidiol. 3 of them attempting to define it and remove it from the Controlled Substances Act, and one of them, the newest one, Dianne Feinstein prime-sponsored just this July, attempting to force the U.S. Attorney General to determine whether it should be a Schedule I controlled substance, and then going on for 16 more pages saying, basically trying to tell the U.S. Attorney General to determine that it's actually a Schedule II, which we don't want. We want it totally removed. So I want folks to know that if our federal government thought that cannabidiol was legal, then why on God's green earth do we have 4 pending federal bills attempting to define it, 3 of them remove it, and the other one to reschedule it? So, and then we have this DEA Form 225, which is basically to register to do business with a controlled substance, whether it's importing, exporting, researching, manufacturing, producing, processing. There's this DEA Form 225. Now, they revised that form in April of 2012 and had not revised it since November of 1999. And when the new April 2012 version of this simple form came out, all of a sudden, cannabidiol was listed as a Schedule I controlled substance, and it had been given a controlled substance number. I looked into it, and it turns out that there was a proposed rule in July of 2011 where the DEA was attempting to define marijuana extracts and assign it a drug control number. Now, it's never been formally adopted, but as is often the DEA's practice, they go ahead and move forward as if they had formally adopted something, even though it hadn't been. So it's made its way to the form. So there are these arguments, of course, that the federal government makes that says, no, this is illegal. So now let's get into the immediate question that you asked, which is, what states? Which states? Is it legal? Can it come across state lines? So on top of this Section 7606, which, by the way, is a federal law, but it is state-specific. So it's very important to know that it says in states that permit the cultivation of hemp, permit meaning it has passed legislation, and that state has to be compliant with Section 7606. So of the 31 states that have legalized hemp in some way, only 10 have really ever been able to get seeds in the ground. Most are not compliant, just poor bill drafting, poor regulation, no funding, and so they can't be. Washington, I'm proud to say, we're basically the most compliant, although we just passed hemp legislation in March, and we're writing our rules. So we have that body of law. On top of it, this Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2016 included in it, and I'm not going to bother talking about the history because there was an inclusion in 2015, but bringing you up to speed and for the sake of time and efficiency, in the Consolidation Appropriations Act of 2016, if you look at Section 763, something fascinating was included there, and it was the Vote Hemp and the Kentucky Congress, the Kentucky folks that got this language in. And what it says is that no funds made available by this act may be used in contravention of Section 7606, which it said that last year. And you know, as someone in the legal field, that in contravention of is pretty darn vague.
Yep.
But this year it says semicolon or to prohibit the, and I'm telling you this from memory, but to prohibit the cultivation, transportation, processing, or sale of industrial hemp that's grown in compliance with Section 7606 within or outside of the state that it is grown. Now, when this thing passed, in the hemp world, we were just, well, those who didn't realize that was coming, were just like, no way, oh my God, the clouds have parted. I can't believe this. They're saying that you can't use these funds. And by the way, it was in a section of that Appropriations Act that applies to all federal governments, not just the DOJ and the DEA. So the fact that it says you can't use these funds to prohibit the cultivation, transportation, processing, sale of that hemp within or outside of the state that it is grown is pretty major. But we giveth in one hand, we taketh away in the other. So we've got the Congress and some of these real heroes, both in the House and in the Senate, pushing this forward on a federal level. But then what do we deal with? We're still dealing with the DEA. So this August, on August 12th, a joint statement of principles was published in the Federal Register by the DEA, the USDA, and the FDA. And it is a statement of principles on Section 7606. And it was great in some ways, very disappointing in others. There's been a lot of pushback. And in that disappointment, they were like, no, you can't take it across state lines. No, this is not intended to circumvent the Controlled Substances Act. No, you may not touch the cannabinoids. I mean, and that's what the statement of principles was. Within 5 days of that statement of principles being published, we had the Hemp Industries Association, which has been here fighting for hemp since 1994. We had Mitch McConnell's office from Kentucky, the Kentucky Department of Ag, and Professor David Williams from the University of Kentucky all sent letters pushing back and saying, no, this was not the intent. This is not the legislative intent of Section 7606 and Section 763, and this is what it's meant to mean. And then on October 27th, Rand Paul, again, Kentucky, we really owe a lot to Kentucky, sent a letter pushing back in the very same way, but he had 16 other federal legislators sign that letter. So we're still in this, major pushback, and the joint statement of principles, for what it's worth, the good news is at the bottom, of course, it says this statement does not create any legal binding requirements. Side note, the reason why they do that is because then they can skirt the rulemaking process and then still stand behind their statement of principles. But, of course, we know what that means on a more sophisticated level. You're damn right it doesn't have any legal binding requirements. Your statement of principles sucks.
Well, kind of weaving through this marvelous forest of trees of laws and regulations and opinions and injections from different government officials, let's take a drone's eye view.
So hard to, I know, I can't apologize enough, but keep going.
But of course, I mean, this is what makes the discussion just fascinating and complex. There is so much to say about it and so many different sticks to kind of pile into the bin. But I think what some of the listeners are really curious about is just, now what? They go on the internet, they can go to CBD websites, they can buy CBD. Are they doing anything illegal? What do we make of all of this forestry of laws and regulations? For the average person, he wakes up on a Monday and he wants to buy CBD, or the average entrepreneur, he wants to sell CBD. What?
Yes.
Now what?
So here we go. This is how I start out the CLEs, and it is defensible and forward thinking. Defensible and forward thinking. But to say that it is legal in all 50 states is inaccurate, it's wrong, and it's being said by non-lawyers, and people are believing it, and they're making them complicit. Having said that, defensible. And we like that it's defensible, and we like that it's just burgeoning the way that it is. But let's narrow down. Say you're getting targeted. So there's a manufacturer in Florida who his son was a football player at a college, and the player's mother was terribly sick, and he knew that the CBD could help her. And so he asked his dad, please, when you come across state lines to my football game, will you please bring some CBD for this mother? He brought it to her. She was in love with it. It really helped her. She was so grateful. Until she got in trouble with the feds for getting her cancer cured, and then having a GoFundMe to collect more money after her cancer was cured. And she got in trouble for fraud. And then the feds found out about the CBD, and she ratted on the quarterback's dad, who risked stuff to take this little tiny tincture bottle on a plane, and then the FBI is calling him, and of course he denied. I mean, please, the FBI is saying, did you bring CBD? But no, I didn't. I don't know what she's talking about. But so, sure, legal in all 50 states until you get a call from the FBI. And so,
we briefly talked about this. But again, on as high level as possible, given the constraints of the enormity of laws and regulations. Many, the intuition, and I think this is in large part due to the ambiguity that we kind of referenced earlier, is that depending on, so there's kind of a burden of proof issue. Where was that CBD derived from? Was it derived from hemp? Was it derived from cannabis? Can they prove that? Who has the burden of proof?
So 2 things I want to tell you. First of all, when you're in a room with marijuana people and you say cannabis, and I walk in both worlds, I sit on multiple marijuana boards, I'm a marijuana girl as well. Having said that, I'm an industrial hemp specialist, and I'm a total geek and a nerd with cannabis. So when people say hemp and cannabis, you have to understand that the intellectuals in the room are going, what the hell are you talking about? Cannabis is hemp. So that's why we use the word hemp and marijuana, which I am reclaiming for everybody right now. There's no way I'm going to let those special interests from 1937 take away my right to use the word marijuana. A lot of people say it's a racist term. So anyway, when we say hemp and cannabis, so you know, it's like saying hemp and hemp or cannabis and cannabis. So you can say hemp and marijuana, or you can say hemp and adult use cannabis, but hemp and marijuana is really the way to go, and I just want to make sure your audience knows that, because to say hemp and cannabis is saying hemp and hemp or cannabis and cannabis in reality.
I see. So, okay.
But I do want to clarify something for you that is very helpful to get to your question. So when we talk about compliant states, for example, we have Oregon and Washington right next to each other. In Oregon, those licensed hemp farmers are allowed to extract under state law right on the books. You can extract cannabinoids under your hemp. We have strong testing requirements. Oregon actually can brag that they have the most rigid testing requirements and thus potentially the highest quality hemp-derived CBD in the country. Now move just directly to their neighbor to the north in Washington. Our law specifically states, and I had to agree to this because we finally, after 3 years of competing bills, the WSDA and I went in as a united front to get this thing passed this year and agreed behind closed doors before we went together as a united front, because our legislature, our governor, our Department of Health, and our Liquor Cannabis Board and our Department of Ag, nobody wants hemp-derived CBD in this state for a number of different reasons, but the biggest one being that our state views cannabinoids from the cannabis plant to be resins and therefore unlawful. And so we are, right here in Washington, our hemp farmers are absolutely by law, it's not in the rules, which are still being drafted, it was written into the law. If it is meant for topical use, human ingestion, or inhalation, only the seeds may be processed. And that was their way of making no loopholes for people to be able to process any other part of the plant for topical use, human ingestion, or inhalation. So there are states that recognize this area and are being ultra safe and saying our program is going to be totally federally compliant down to the letter of the DEA law. And then you have other states saying, we're going to do it. We're moving forward. We're going to do it and let them come after us. And it's because of all these ambiguities that they basically don't come after.
Wow. There's just so much to juggle and to worry about and to think about. We're getting ready to wrap up, but, what do you want listeners to walk away with from this conversation?
That it is defensible, that it is absolutely an untrue statement to say that CBD is legal in all 50 states, and it is also a defensible statement. It is an untrue and defensible statement. It is a gray, curious area of law. I will also say that hemp-derived CBD is a function of prohibition because, again, since the main difference between the two types of cannabis, hemp and marijuana, are low resin versus high resin. If you're trying to get resin, you'd get it from a high resin crop. So if we were free to breed this plant for the properties that we wanted to breed it for, of course we would just get our cannabinoids from marijuana. But since there is a seeming gray area and a seeming exception for hemp, folks get it from hemp. Having said that, you made the great point of saying, where is it derived? It's proof. Most folks, in the beginning particularly, were getting it from marijuana and then saying it was from hemp. And even now, most of the hemp-derived CBD that comes in it's proclaimed that, the imported stuff in particular, that it's just from the stock. So I guess what I would say is, with so many people in this space, you want to make sure of where you're getting it processed, the methods being used for that type of process. But in terms of mailing it around the world, just because you received it in the mail does not mean that you should be mailing it to other people. Just to recognize that you're dipping your toe in the water of a Schedule I controlled substance, but it's defensible, and the risk of someone coming after you, of course, is very low. But the risk is a lot higher now for folks who are in the space on a manufacturing level. The industry itself needs to take on the DEA by filing an administrative petition and saying, it doesn't belong on the Schedule I Controlled Substances Act.
In a certain way, I think a good way really to think about it is like the trafficking of illegally downloaded music. If you're one person who just downloads a song on a file sharing site, chances are nothing's going to happen to you. But if you're the guy who's uploading reams of songs, gigabytes of songs, and it's disseminating all throughout the country, there's a good chance, there's an interest in you. Certainly federally, people don't want people doing that on a mass scale. So,
Exactly. You're exactly right. And then there's the odd man out where you got somebody who's taking a tincture to his quarterback son's sick mother, and then all of a sudden the spotlight's on him. Very rare, but yes, it does happen.
Right. Some guy wakes up and he hits the reverse lottery, and for him, being the 1 out of 100 just really is unfortunate.
It's true. And the UK, by the way, the European, well, no, it was the UK, not the whole European Union, also in August came out and declared cannabidiol as having medicinal value. So here we have, again, giveth in one hand, taketh away in the other. They say it has medicinal value. So all of us activists are like, oh my God, the clouds have parted. They finally acknowledged that it has medicinal value. But then what do you think the next sentence was? Therefore, everybody here who's involved in this stuff needs to stop marketing, importing, exporting, and they're starting a rigorous licensing system there. And the United States is starting to kind of follow that and starting to push back a little bit. But the industry can take this on. I don't want to leave folks with the idea that this is super dangerous. I want to leave folks with the idea that there is tremendous power in numbers, but to understand that it is a very gray area.
Well, listen, Joy, this was a real pleasure for me. You're certainly one of the more interesting and knowledgeable guests that we've had on the show. So I really want to thank you and of course, welcome you back anytime you'd like.
Oh, I would be so honored, and I'm really grateful that you're doing this and everything that you folks do, and to build the industry. And believe me, I'm going to send some folks your way. I've got folks in your area.
Great. Well, listen, Joy. Thanks again. This was really great. How can people reach you, get in touch with you, learn more about you, read your stuff? What should folks know about you?
Oh, thanks so much. Hempace.com, like the ace of spades or the ace of hemp. Hempace.com is my website. I can be contacted through there, learn about me through there, and all of my speaking engagements are also there. And I speak constantly. It's my favorite thing to do. I can't help but do it. So, hempace.com, check it out, and I appreciate that.
Okay, great. Well, this was another wonderful interview with cannabis thought leaders. This is Abe Cohn, and we will hear from you all in the near future. Thanks, Joy.
Thank you.